You call your cat, and nothing happens. No movement, no reaction, not even a glance. For a second you wait. Maybe they didn't hear you. So you call again. Still nothing. And in that silence, a thought starts to form. Are they just ignoring me? But here's something most people don't know. Studies on feline behavior have shown that cats can recognize their owner's voice, even when they choose not to respond to it, which means something very important. That moment, when your cat doesn't react, is not absence, it's choice. So the real question isn't why your cat is ignoring you. It's this: what is your cat trying to say when it doesn't respond at all? Because in the feline world, silence is never empty. When your cat doesn't react to your voice, it doesn't mean they didn't hear you. In many cases, it means the exact opposite. They heard you clearly, they recognized you instantly, and then they made a decision not to move. That might sound cold at first, but in reality, it reveals something deeper about how cats experience the world. In nature, cats don't respond to everything. They don't waste energy on unnecessary reactions. Every movement has a purpose. Every response has a cost. So when your cat stays still, when it doesn't rush toward you, when it simply continues grooming or resting as if nothing happened, that can actually be a sign of something unexpected: security. Your presence is already known, already understood. There is no threat, no urgency, no need to confirm anything. And in the feline mind, that lack of reaction can carry a very quiet message. I know you're there, and everything is fine. But there's another layer to this that most people never consider. Dogs respond, cats decide. When a dog hears you, it reacts. When a cat hears you, it evaluates. There's a pause, a moment of internal processing. Do I want to engage right now? And that single question changes everything. Because if the answer is no, nothing happens. Not because they don't care, not because they're distant, but because their sense of autonomy is stronger than the need to respond immediately. Cats are not wired to obey. They are wired to choose. So when your cat looks at you, holds that eye contact for just a second, and then slowly turns its head away, that's not rejection, that's resolution. A decision has been made. And in that moment, your cat is not disconnecting from you. It's simply choosing not to act. And then comes the part that almost everyone misinterprets. In the animal world, constant reaction is not always a good sign. In fact, it often signals tension. An animal that reacts to every sound, every movement, every call is an animal that is scanning, on edge, never fully at rest. But a cat that ignores small stimuli, that doesn't react to every call, that remains calm, still, and composed, is often a cat that feels safe. Safe enough not to react. Safe enough not to care about every little change in the environment. So when you call your cat, and it continues grooming, slow, repetitive movements, or remains curled up, eyes half closed, breathing steady, that's not indifference, that's regulation. That's a nervous system that is not under pressure. And in many ways, that's one of the clearest signs of comfort a cat can show. But here's where it becomes even more interesting. Humans seek constant reassurance. We look for signs that the bond is there. We want responses. Eye contact, engagement, confirmation. Cats don't operate like that. They don't reinforce relationships through repetition. They don't need to prove the bond over and over again to a cat. Once trust is established, it simply exists, quietly, without performance, without demonstration, which creates a strange and almost counterintuitive truth. The more your cat trusts you, the less it may feel the need to respond to you all the time. Because from their perspective, there's nothing to question, nothing to check, nothing to prove. And then, there's the detail that changes everything. The part most people completely overlook. The moment you think your cat ignored you is not the full story. Because cats don't always respond in the moment. They respond in timing. You call them. Nothing happens, minutes pass, and then suddenly, without being called again, they enter the room. Quiet steps, soft movement. They don't make a sound. They don't announce anything. They just appear and settle somewhere near you. Not directly on you, not seeking attention, just close enough. Present without being obvious, and that moment right there. That's not random. That's intentional proximity. A choice to be near you, on their terms. Cats don't always respond with action. Sometimes they respond with positioning. And sometimes what looks like distance in one moment is actually connection, just delayed. So maybe your cat was never ignoring you. Maybe you were just expecting a different kind of answer, because cats don't communicate like humans. And they don't communicate like dogs. They communicate in space, in timing, in stillness, in silence. And once you start seeing those patterns, once you begin to notice what happens beyond the obvious, everything changes. The lack of response becomes information. The pause becomes intention. The distance becomes trust. And the silence finally starts to speak. So today, don't just call your cat and wait for a reaction. Observe what happens after, where they go, how they move, where they choose to be. Because that's where the real communication is happening. Not in the moment you expect, but in the moment they choose. And if you made it this far, it means you're starting to see what most people never notice. Like, subscribe and stay curious. Because here, we don't just watch animals. We learn how to understand them, and once you understand them, you start to see things you can't unsee. Thank you for watching.